you don't mind. So we talked about how if you make a blessing on something made out of grain and it's bread, the blessing is hamotzie, and the blessing afterwards is the birkat hamazon, the grace after meals, the long benching. If it's something that's made out of grain and is not bread, so it's mizonot beforehand, and afterwards it's a shorter grace after meals called al hamichya, or sometimes called a bracha acharona, blessing afterwards. So the question, of course, becomes, well, what's bread and what's not bread? If it's cake, it's mizonot, and the blessing afterwards is a bracha acharona, which is shorter than the long grace after meals. If it's bread, then I'm going to have to say hamotzi lechem min haaretz. God brings out bread from the ground, and the long blessing afterwards. So how do you tell the difference between what's bread and what is not bread? What is, right? Because the funny thing is, let's say pretzels, right? Pretzels are what blessing?
Mizonot.
Yeah, mizonot. Why? Because they're not bread. They're the same ingredients as bread, flour and water, right? Salt, maybe. Same ingredients as bread, but it's a different blessing. Why is it a different blessing? The answer is it's not bread because it's cooked until it's hard. And that's not called bread. That's called a pretzel or a cracker. Or if you put sweet things into the bread dough and you cook it, that's called cake, right? So that's not bread. Now, this goes all the way back to the Talmud. The Talmud has the idea that it calls it pat hababakisnin, bread with a pocket, bread in which they would put sweet things. And that was, the Talmud says, not hamotzi, but mizonot, soft pretzel. So again, some of this becomes a little bit subjective, right? Let me ask you this. How about raisin bread, raisin challah? Is that hamotzi or is that mizonot? What do you think? Let's see. Raise your hand or so indicate. How many people think that raisin challah should be hamotzi? Raise your hand. Okay. How many people think raisin challah should be mizonot? That it's not bread. Oh, so everybody agrees that it's bread. Okay. So what if instead of just raisins, you put honey in? You ever see this on Rosh Hashanah? People will make bread, a challah, and they'll put in a lot of honey. A lot of honey. So let's say you have raisins and also a lot of honey. Is that bread or cake? So it can become a little bit hard to figure out. So one of the things in Jewish law that makes it bread is if it's flour and water. If you substitute fruit juice for water, it's not, according to many opinions, it's not considered bread. That's considered pata babakisnin, bread with a pocket, bread in which sweet things have been added. And so mizonos bread, it's a little bit of a strange thing to figure out. Because the mizonos bread, what they call on airplanes mizonos bread, right? It comes in a little shrink wrap thing. It looks like a roll. By the way, if you had not seen written on there that this is mizonos, what would you have thought? Would you have thought it was any different than bread? No, right? It looks like bread, tastes like bread, has the consistency of bread. You would have no idea that it's not bread if you didn't see the little sign on it. So how could it be mizonot? So there's an argument about this. Many people hold that since it's not made with water, there's no water in it, there's only fruit juice and flour, that it's mizonot. Other people hold that since it's functioning like bread, and it looks like bread, and it tastes like bread, that's bread, and that would be hamotzi. So there are people who disagree with the whole mizonos roll thing. The upside of mizonos rolls is you don't have to, according to those opinions that hold that way, you don't have to wash on them. So you don't have to get up from your seat on an airplane. It's much easier. But there are certainly those people who hold that you would make hamotzi, especially if you're making a meal out of it on a mizonos roll. I think there's grounds to just make mizonos on it, especially if it's hard to wash on a plane, which it is. And there's certainly lots of opinions that way. But that's even a little bit different than, there is a point at which I think challah, like for Rosh Hashanah, when people put a lot of honey in challah and bake it that way. I'm not talking about honey on challah. That was bread, so that's definitely hamotzi. You can put whatever you want on bread, it's still hamotzi. But if it's baked as cake, meaning it's very sweet and there's a lot of stuff in it, so that could be cake and not challah and not bread. I had a teacher once who said, if you would make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich out of it, then it's bread. Right. So what did he mean by that? In other words, there is a subjectivity to what's bread and what's cake. Right. You all said, I think everybody said raisin bread is bread. Right. But would you say that banana bread is bread? The thing we call banana bread, I think most people would call it cake. Right. Because it has more stuff in it. It's more, the consistency is slightly different. And I think it is. I think it's cake. So I agree with you. I think raisin bread is bread, but it's partly how we see it and how we use it. Because we see it as bread. But at a certain point, you could have a halachic problem, especially comes up for Rosh Hashanah, because people put a lot of honey sometimes into challah for Rosh Hashanah because you don't have a sweet year. I don't know. So at a certain point, though, bread, if you put too much things in it and bake it, it could be that it's not hamotzi anymore, that it's really mizonos. Yeah. Good.
I have a question, just to clarify.
Yeah.
What is mezonot bread? Like this bread on the airplane, what makes it? What did they do to make it different?
So they just use fruit juice instead of water. Yeah. So that's the question. Is according to many, that is enough. But according to others, because it really tastes no different than bread, it should be hamotzi. But I think you can make this on some. Yeah. Let's see. Maybe we can even find. Yeah. Oh, pizza. Very good question. Very good.
I read for pizza that it depends on whether the crust is baked before or whether it's all baked together. I don't know if that's like the example you gave about the honey. Right.
So, I mean, if you really bake the entire crust beforehand, then that crust, if it's made out of bread and if it's made out of flour and water, is hamotzi. So just because you put things, if that crust is fully cooked and then you put toppings on it and heat it up, so that bread was hamotzi before. It doesn't change from being hamotzi. In order to change it from being hamotzi, you'd have to like crush it up. So it's still hamotzi. But let's say that the way pizza is usually made is maybe the dough's cooked a tiny bit, but usually the dough and the toppings are cooked together. So if that's true, it's not really, it was never bread. Pizza should be mezonot, right? It's no different than than bread that has, sweet things baked into it or other things baked into it. It's definitely not bread. It's pizza. They don't call it bread. They call it pizza. So generally, pizza we assume is mizonot. Now, Rav Moshe Feinstein said that if you have more than two pieces of like a big New York pizza, that you should make hamotzie on it. And the reason is that if you eat a large amount of mizonot and you make a meal on it, you would say hamotzie. Yeah. So that's why. So some people, if they eat a lot of pizza and they're making a meal out of it, they would say hamotzie. There's grounds to just say mizonot also. But fundamentally, pizza, assuming that the crust wasn't fully baked before, fundamentally, pizza should be mizonot because it was bread baked with things in it. Yeah, it was never, you wouldn't call it bread. Okay, very good. Yeah, you will find a lot of different opinions on things. Okay, any other questions?
Rabbi Schachter, I have my hand up. Sorry, I don't know if
Oh,
you
sorry.
can see it, but
Yeah.
it's okay. Isn't pizza often a minchag too? Like I know the fortings say hamotzie even on one slice because it's like their minchag. So
Okay. Yeah.
that,
so
is that fine?
one slice
Okay.
they make hamotzie. They're very religious.
Yes.
No, I'm just kidding. I have not heard that, but I'm sure there's an opinion like that. And yeah, if that's somebody's tradition, is to make hamotzie, you have to figure out if it's a correct tradition. Why would that be? I mean, do they distinguish between whether they're making a meal out of it or not?
No, they've talked about the Rav Feinstein thing before. Like I know some of Judah's YU friends will make it, they'll take that basically interpretation and make it if it's 2 or more slices, but their family does it no matter what with pizza. And I don't know, they always just say it's a minchag. I think that because like in their family, they just consider one slice of pizza to be a meal probably. Yeah.
That's interesting. So that's an interesting question, by the way. Are these things dependent on the individual or not? In other words, let's say that, from a biblical point of view, you bench when you're satisfied. If you've eaten enough to be satisfied. From a rabbinic point of view, if you've eaten more than a kazayit, more than an olive size of bread, you would bench. But let's say a person is very small and they can't eat very much. They can only eat half a kazayit. And it's when they're full. So I would assume that biblically they could bench. I would think even less than a kazayit. So I see you're saying, in other words, if you always make a meal of one piece of pizza, it also depends how you measure these things. Is it the size of an egg? An egg we assume is at least 2 olive sizes. So how much grain is in a piece of pizza? I don't know. I'm sure there's a basis for what they're doing, but it would be interesting. You should talk to Judah and say to him, why do does that, do you? Is
I'm
every
very excited
minhag,
now to ask why.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question, by the way. Is every custom necessarily fit with Jewish law? Could you have a custom that maybe isn't?
So if the custom doesn't fit with Jewish law, do you drop the custom?
Yeah, probably. It depends what it is, but yeah, I mean, I would say, do the analysis, take a look at different opinions, and see if there's room for yeah, I mean, it also depends how much a kibetza is. Also, how you measure the size of an egg. Now, there are different opinions on how to measure the size of an olive and an egg, whether you go by weight, whether you go by volume. So it could also depend on that. If they have an opinion, when they eat matzah on Pesach, do they eat a lot of matzah or just a little matzah?
Sorry, are you asking me?
Yeah.
I think it would depend on the meal, right? Or are you talking at the Seder?
At the Seder to fulfill the mitzvah of eating matzah. Because in theory,
Oh,
if
they don't.
they believe that, what?
Sorry. I know like some in their family will do like you have to do this amount of matzah, right? They don't do that. I think they just do like a few bites.
Oh, so maybe they might hold that the size of an olive and the size of an egg are actually smaller than some other people might hold. There's an argument about how big these things are. So that would be consistent. In other words, if you believe that you make hamotzie on a small, a slice of pizza that might not have that much grain in it. So the other side of that coin might be, because it's the size of an egg, you believe that eggs are smaller, halachically. There was different opinions about what's the size of an olive, what's the size of an egg. So if you hold like those opinions that say it's smaller, so the other side of that coin is you wouldn't have to eat as much matzah on Pesach to fulfill the commandment of eating matzah. Let's say you hold that the size of an olive is this big instead of this big. So in other words, in a certain way, hamotzi, on how much bread you have to eat for hamotzi, to bench is going to be, if you hold that to small amount, so you're going to have to wash and bench more often, but you're also not going to have to eat as much matzah because you're going to hold that you fulfill the mitzvah with less matzah. Because the fundamental question here is, what's the size of an egg or an olive? What if you just ate the pizza crust or the edge? No, so if the pizza was baked with the stuff on it, even though it's true, if you cut off the crust, it looks like bread, we wouldn't divide it up and say that's bread, that's not bread. I think the whole thing is one thing.
Yeah, and Rabbi Schaffner.
Yeah.
Weren't there also different measurements in, say, the wilderness and in Jerusalem, and there were different? I remember reading something of that nature.
We don't really know what their measurements were. We have later authorities.
Yeah.
That and again, the question of, is it the volume of an olive? Is it the weight of an olive? Is that? So we have, arguments about this already into the 19th, 20th centuries.
Yeah.
Chazon Ish had a very large amount, but others had smaller amounts. How do you know how the pizza was baked? You can assume if you're eating pizza that it's mizonot. That's what I believe. Let's see, let's try. I always tell you guys these the panine halacha. Let's try that. That was interesting. Somebody has an article here on the Israeli website. The Amazonas bread. Let's see what this person says. You'll find, if you Google it, you'll find a lot of articles about these things. Here. Amazonas bread. That happens to be a website called Yeshiva. It's an Israeli website. And it's, I think it's Har Bracha. With several yeshivas put together. Popular website. Eating mizonos bread by itself requires a blessing of bari mina mizonos and not hamotzi unless a very large quantity. So he holds here the large quantity is 225 grams. It's probably 2 egg sizes. Question, however, is what's the hamotzi if you eat mizonos bread, right? That was Rachel's. That was question was that? That was Sophie's question. Do you make hamotzi or mizonot on mizonot bread? The halacha as followed by Ashkenazim is that if a quantity of mizonot bread equivalent to the quantity of regular bread that's normally eaten at a meal, you must do hamotzi and say birkat hamazon. I'm not sure that's true. The halacha is followed by most Sfardim is to say hamotzi on mizonos bread even during a meal only if you've eaten a large quantity of it. See, this person is quite strict. Right? He thinks there's no such thing as mizonos bread. He thinks if you're eating it as a meal, that it's got to be hamotzi because it looks like bread. But for instance, you'll find other people, Chabad especially, that do believe that mazonos bread is mazonos. See, I like him because usually he gives a few different opinions. Oops. Maybe that they don't have loads of blessings. Let's see. Yes. Sometimes things are not translated into English. So it's like in Hebrew. Here's this loaf of cake. I'll translate this for you. It says, Shalosh deos namru lagabe achilas minei ma'afa shal mezonot shedu l'kinuch b'suda. Oh, this is talking about dessert. Oh, this is a good halacha to know. Saying there are three different opinions about eating something that's mezonot for dessert. Yesh omrim shein mevarcham lehem mezonot, hovahim domu lechem. Maybe you don't make mezonot on them because you already made hamotzi on the meal, so maybe dessert is covered as part of the meal. Mineged, another opinion is, since you're eating it as dessert, right? Let's say you're eating cake at the end of the meal, eating it as dessert. You made hamotzi on the meal, and you're not eating it in order to be more full. You're eating it as dessert. So it's not really part of the meal. It's not covered under the hamotzi. Right? And as if you eat more bread during a meal, you don't make another hamotzi. It's part of the original hamotzi. So the question is, how do you view something that's mezonot, cake eaten at the end of the meal? Is it part of the meal? Is it separate from the meal, but since you're eating it, and is it separate from the meal and you're eating it as dessert, then you make a separate bracha. And some say that we're not sure. Sheesh suffix, it's a doubt. We're not sure if it's part of the meal or not. We cave and suffix, but right, if you ate fruit, let's say for dessert, or ice cream for dessert. So most people hold that those would be separate from the hamotzi, separate from the meal, and you make a separate bracha on them if made for dessert. But the problem is eating cake for dessert is mizonot. Like mizonot is, it's a little like hamotzi, it's a little like bread. It's part of a meal. So that's the question, is this separate? Is it included under the hamotzi? Is it not included under the hamotzi because it's a separate thing dessert? Or we're not sure. Given just suffix bracha, because we're unsure, so then don't make another bracha. And some people, It's interesting. He says here you could sort of decide. He says, "Arotzim lechem mizonot besuda tzricha mahachlit atzmam." Says if you want to eat mizonot, you have to ask yourself, how do you view this eating of dessert? Im yachlitan shei chelek mesuda. Do you see this cake that you're eating as part of the meal? So then it's covered under the hamotzie. You don't have to make another blessing. And if you feel that this mizonot that you're eating, this cake that you're eating, is dessert, it's a separate thing from the meal. So then you should make mizonot, he says. And if you're not sure, then you don't make a blessing. Because when you're unsure about a blessing, you don't make a blessing. It's interesting. So he's saying that it's sort of subjective. He's not saying that, there's halachic opinions and you are bound by them. He's saying you need to know, what is it for you? That's an interesting thing. That's unusual. Sometimes some poskim, some books of Jewish law might just say, here's how we see it. Either it is or it isn't, and here's what I believe. But he's saying actually that it's subjective to the person. That's interesting. And if you're not sure, you don't make a blessing, because whenever you're unsure, you don't make an extra blessing. So that's usually what I do. I do not make a blessing. If I eat cake at the end of the meal, I don't make mizonot. But if I eat like ice cream or fruit or something that's clearly separate from the meal, then I do make a separate bracha on it. Another option is to bench from your meal, say birkat hamazon, and then eat dessert, because then you have to make a blessing on it. So then that's another option. Yeah. Okay.
What if you don't have bread at the meal and then you eat?
No, so then it's a separate. Then you're making a separate blessing and everything in the meal. Yeah. Okay. Very good.
So let's say if you're like, I tend to be a grazer throughout the day.
Okay.
So I'm working, right? And I seriously eat something like every 2 hours.
Okay.
So how does one approach that?
Yeah. So 2 hours, those are separate. You're hungry, but partly it might depend on what you had in mind. Now, even if you sat down to eat, let's say an apple, you're only going to eat one apple. And then at the end of that apple, you decide you're going to take for eat another apple. So you'd make another blessing than that apple, because it wasn't part of your original intent. So definitely, if you ate something now, eat something in 2 hours, you definitely make a separate blessing.
And then kind of the after blessing, the before and after blessings.
Yeah, you would do both. Okay. Yeah.
So if you eat like a piece of toast and then eat another piece of toast, you're in for a long.
Yeah. 2 hours later, yeah. Now, if you ate a piece of toast and you want to eat another piece, you wouldn't make another hamotzie. If you're still hungry, if you're still full from the meal, then that's considered part of the meal. And if they bring out more for the meal, even though you didn't intend to eat it, if you made hamotzie, that would be covered under it. But if it's a whole new thing, it's hours later, you don't even feel that meal before then.
Yeah. Thank you.
Very good. Okay. So today, by the way, is Rosh Chodesh. It's the new moon. And the new moon is sometimes 1 day, sometimes 2 days. Depends if the month is 29 or 30 days. So this one is 2 days. So it's last night and today, and then tonight and tomorrow. This is the beginning of the month of Tammuz, or the 4th month. Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz. So Tammuz is the 4th month of the year. And in it, we have a fast day, and that is the 17th of Tammuz. And the 17th of Tammuz will be in 17 days. Now, the thing is that 17 days from yesterday, let's see. 17th of Tammuz this year is on Saturday. It's on Shabbat. Shabbat, July 16th. So we don't fast on Shabbat, except for Yom Kippur. So what do we do? So the answer is that we push it off until Sunday. until Sunday the 17th is going to be a fast from dawn in the morning until dark at night. The reason that we fast on that day is that it commemorates 5 bad things that happened. Part of them during the destruction of the temple, part of them before that. There's a Mishnah in Ta'anit. Let's see. Oops. It says Chamisha Devarim, 5 things happened to our ancestors on the 17th of Tammuz and 5 things on the 9th of Av. The 17th of Tammuz, Moses came down from the mountain and broke the tablets. But if you think about it, 40 days ago, from the 17th of Tammuz, so you have the first month of the year is Nisan, then Iyar, then Sivan. On the 7th day of Sivan is Shavuot, the day that we commemorate receiving the Torah. Remember, we studied all night. So 40 days later is the 17th of the next month, the 17th of Tammuz. So if Moses went up on the mountain on Shavuot, on the 7th of Sivan, so 40 days later when he came down was the 17th of Tammuz. And our tradition is that he came down, he saw the golden calf, and he broke the tablets. So the day of the breaking of the tablets, the Mishnah says, was the 17th of Tammuz. This is a whole tractate about Ta'anit, about fast days. It's mostly about fasting for what happens when there's no rain in Israel. But at the end, it talks a little bit about the fast days that we keep to memorialize destruction of the temple. So that was one. Batal HaTamid, the continual sacrifice that was brought twice a day in the temple was destroyed. Was nullified when the temple was taken under siege. Behuvka ha'ir, Jerusalem was stormed. The Saraf Apostamus as the Torah. Apostamus burned the Torah. You can see who Apostamus was. And an idol was put in the temple. That was part of the process of these things were all, except for the breaking of the tablets, these things were all part of the destruction of the temple process. B'Tisha B'Av, and on the 9th of Av, it was declared on our ancestors that they would not enter the land. We just read last week about the spies going into the land of Israel, coming back with a bad report. And the Jewish people decide that they're not going to be able to enter the land of Israel because they listened to the spies' bad report instead of trusting in God. And so we have a tradition that took place. The spies came back and the Jews decided not to enter the land of Israel, and it was decreed upon them they'd spend 40 years in the desert. That happened on Tisha B'Av. The first and second temples were destroyed. Milkada Beitar. Beitar was a very big city during the Second Temple period of Jews, and hundreds of thousands of Jews were killed there. It's part of the destruction. Nechasha'ir, and the city of Jerusalem was plowed under by one of the enemies. The Mishnah says when the month of Av begins, next month, in 30 days from now, it's going to be the month of Av, we decrease joy. So we have this from the 17th of Tammuz until the 9th of Av is a 3-week period. And we sometimes call that the 3 weeks. And it's a sad 3 weeks. So this month is not entirely a sad month. Next month, the month of Av, the beginning of it is sad. And so the first 13 days of the 3 weeks, starting from the 17th of this month until the end of the month, and the first day of the next month, first day of Av, those 13 days are a little bit sad. But starting from the first day of Av, the Mishnah just said that from the first day of Av is the name for the 5th month. We decrease joy. Starting from the 1st of Av, for the 9 days from 1st of Av till the 9th of Av, those are much more mournful. And during the Sephardic Jews only commemorate from the beginning of Av until Tisha B'Av as sad times when they don't get married, they don't get haircuts, they don't listen to live music, they don't go to parties, that kind of thing. Ashkenazic Jews extend that to the whole 3 weeks, from the beginning of the 3 weeks on the 17th of Tammuz until the 9th of Av. We don't get haircuts, we don't get married. Those are the main things. Also during many people don't buy new clothing during the 9 days, maybe even during the 3 weeks. Many people don't say Shechianu. If you eat a new fruit, you say Shechianu. And the blessing is, blessed are you, God, that has kept us alive and brought us to this auspicious time, because you're eating a new fruit or you got a new garment. But how can you say that at a time that's actually fundamentally a sad time for the Jewish people? Many people do not say the blessing of Shechianu during the 3 weeks. So the first 13 days are kind of semi-sad, and then during the 9 days, it's even more so. Many people do not so for instance, during the first 13 days of the 3 weeks, you can go swimming. But during the 9 days, we don't bathe for pleasure, so we don't go swimming during the 9 days. Yeah. Look at some of the laws. Okay, here's a good, okay. Okay. So this is, I've told many of you about this book of Jewish law, the Penimei Halacha, which I like very much. I know the Beis Din recommends the Art Scroll books. You can look at both. They're both legitimate books. You can see which ones you like better, which ones work better for you. I happen to like Penimei Halacha. It happens to be free online in English and in Hebrew. Not all of it's in English, but a lot of it is. So I just Googled it, and I looked up Penimei Halacha and the 3 weeks. And so it has a whole chapter about the 3 weeks. And also about the week of Tisha B'Av. And there's a separate chapter. And then there's a separate chapter on the eve of Tisha B'Av and the laws of Tisha B'Av. We'll start with the customs of the 3 weeks. It's just a very accessible online thing. And right, so it says it begins at the 17th of Tammuz. And in order to signify the nature of the period, we have 3 special haftarot. At the end of the Torah portion, we read a section from the prophets. The ones we read starting from the 17th of Tammuz are 3 sad ones about the destruction. He says, even though the sages did not make any special enactments to mark the suffering and mourning of the 3 weeks, right? Remember, we just saw in the Mishnah, it said from the beginning of the month of Av, it becomes sad, right? So that's not the 3 weeks, that's the last 9 days. By the way, we call it the 3 weeks. We refer to the 3 weeks and the 9 days. There's a 3-week period. The last 9 days of that 3-week period are the 9 days. It could be a little bit confusing because the 3 weeks includes the 9 days. But often when we say the 3 weeks, we mean the first 13 days. Whereas the 9 days is the last 9 days of this 3-week period. Does that make sense? So the other customs have been adopted. Ashkenazim, Sephardim, Jews from Morocco and Yerba refrain from cutting the hair the whole 3 weeks Other Sfardim are only strict about it during the week of Tisha B'Av, means the week that Tisha B'Av falls in. Different things. So this is a good thing to read. You'll have a good sense of the 3 weeks and the 9 days and all of these laws. Dancing and music. Let's take a look at that. The Achronim means later authorities. Right, that is forbidden to hold dances from the 17th of Tammuz through the 9th of Av. That's the 3-week period. This prohibition includes playing, listening to instrumental music. By that, instrumental probably means dancing music. Someone may not hold or attend dance classes, concerts, similar else in 3 weeks. One can hold or attend an aerobics class. It's very practical. Main purpose is exercise until the beginning of Av. One should lower the music. So it's clear that the purpose is not the music but the exercise. The Jew makes a living playing music. They play at non-Jewish events until the end of the month of Tammuz, till the beginning of the month of Av. At the beginning of Av, you shouldn't play music at all. Since the reason music is forbidden is that it brings people joy. Music teachers can give lessons till the week of Tisha B'Av. So what about at a Seudat Mitzvah? Let's say that it's a Brit. Let's say somebody has a baby, and a baby is born during the 3 weeks, the 9 days. It's a very happy time. Or Sheva Brachot, somebody got married before the 3 weeks, and now they have 7 days of feasting. Whenever there's a meal right during the first 7 days after a wedding, and there's a minyan there, so you say special prayers at the end of the Birkat Hamazon, special blessings at the end of the Birkat meals. So can you do that? So he deals with that. So this is very good. In other words, some of the words I think they translate into that they're Hebrew words that they spell in English. That could be a little bit hard, but generally he's very, he gives you different opinions, which is nice. And he gives you a sense of the big picture. And let's see if he's lenient or strict about this. Listening to music on personal electronic devices comes up a lot, right? Because obviously the Talmud did not have, iPhones, or phonographs. So are you allowed to listen? It's an interesting question. Are you allowed to listen to recorded music? How do you take the halacha as it is and adapt it to these kinds of modern questions? So he says, some authorities maintain, just as one may not listen to live music during 3 weeks, so too you can't listen to recorded music during this period. One may listen only to songs without instrumental accompaniment. What he means by that is that songs that are not made for dancing, songs that are just like classical music, that you could listen to. This is how some of the great poskim rule, for instance, Rav Moshe Feinstein. By the way, Rav Moshe Feinstein, when he was asked the question, he actually answers it by saying that after the destruction of the temple, you're never allowed to listen to music. He says, but we listen to music. So he says, at least during the 3 weeks, you shouldn't listen to music. That's how he answers it. He says, though, some poskim even forbid listening to a cappella music during these periods. I don't think that's an issue. However, some permit listening to music on electronic devices, reasoning that the Achronim, later authorities, only prohibit listening to live music, which entails some degree of joy. Listening to music through devices, on the other hand, is not particularly festive. Granted, when phonographs, radios, and tape recorders were first introduced, people experienced joy listening to them. Today, however, everybody listens to music all the time, so it's not prohibited. That's what some people hold. Furthermore, distinction can be made between happy songs and regular songs. It's only fitting to prohibit happy songs, whereas regular tunes, certainly sad ones, should not be prohibited. Gemara teaches the custom was to play flutes at a funeral during this time in order to arouse people to cry out. During any time. So you see that there was sad music. That you can't just include all music the same. He says, I heard from my father and teacher. His father and teacher was Rabbi Zalman Melamed. He was a rabbi in a big city in the West Bank, where he is now, I think. That not only may one play sad instrumental songs related to the destruction of the temple on the radio during the 9 days, it is actually good to do so. It inspires people to mourn. According to this, it appears the prohibition mainly relates to listening to joyous music, which is associated with dancing. In the time of the Gemara, music was basically for dancing. When the Talmud talks about what not to do, it talks about going to the Beit HaMishta, the house of feasting. That was where music was, because music was always live, and music was associated with dancing. It's just how it was. So you can read about this. He says maybe you should be strict. You can see there are different opinions about this. I usually allow people to listen to recorded music during. You shouldn't go to a party, where there's people are dancing to music, but during the 3 weeks, I do allow people to. I don't think you should listen to live music or a concert, but I think there's room for listening to recorded music. And then the 9 days becomes a little bit more serious, more strict. And of course, Tisha B'Av itself is the saddest day in the calendar. 9th of Av, when we sit on the floor, we say sad prayers all day. And we read the book of Eicha, the book of Lamentations, which is written by Jeremiah, and it's all about destruction. Any questions? Have you experienced Tisha B'Av last year? Year before we did it like on Zoom because pandemic, but last year was in Shul, and this year will also be in Shul. Usually at night we gather. This year it's going to be. It's funny because Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, also falls on Shabbat this year, so it's going to be pushed off to Sunday. So Saturday night, right after Shabbat, the 9th of Av, fast will begin. So basically, your third meal on Shabbat is your meal before the fast. Now, usually, when it's not Shabbat, right before Tisha B'Av, we eat we eat a meal, so we won't be hungry. But then right before the fast, we sit on the ground and we eat a very small meal. Usually it's like bread and something round, like a mourner eats, like an egg. And some people dip it in ashes to remember Jerusalem. We sit on the floor right before the fast and eat. It's called the Sudam of Second. And so that this year we don't do that because you're not allowed to show outward signs of mourning, of sadness on Shabbos. So you have a regular third meal on Shabbat, and that's your meal, that's going to lead you. And then right when Shabbat ends, that's when Tisha B'Av, that's when the 9th of Av begins. There's no, it happens at one moment. And so you can't make Havdalah. You can't say Havdalah in a cup of wine or grape juice after Shabbat because it's Tisha B'Av. You can't drink it. But remember, the Havdalah on a cup of wine is only so that you can eat. Right? You can say Havdalah by saying, "Blessed is the one who separates between the weekday and the holy and the profane." So that's what we do. We say Baruch Hamav Dolen Kodesh L'Chol, and with that we can do labor after Shabbat. But then after Tisha B'Av, Sunday night before we eat, we'll say Havdalah on a cup of wine. And so Saturday night we'll go to Shul and on the 9th of Av, and we'll read the book of Lamentations, and then there's certain sad prayers that we say, and then in the morning. We say after the davening, after the services, we say about an hour and a half, 2 hours of these sad prayers. Keynote, they're called. Kina means to lament. And they were written, Ashkenazic Jews have more than Sephardic Jews. Many of them are written about the destruction of the temple, but many were written during the medieval period in Ashkenaz, mostly about the Crusades, killing of the Jews of England and expulsion from England in 1080. The destruction of the pogroms and crusades in early Ashkenaz, 11th century, 12th century, burning of all the Talmuds in Paris by King Louis IX, 1244. So the terrible things that happened throughout Jewish history. And then, of course, in the modern period, people have added keynotes for the Holocaust. There's several of those. Maybe we'll look at, next time we'll go look at the book of Lamentations and the book of Keynote, as we are preparing for 3 weeks. By the way, it's a week that I'm going to be away. Next week I'll be here. And I guess we'll have I'm gonna go back to, sorry about the confusion. I'm probably going to go back to Tuesday next week. But I'll send an email. The week after I'll be away. The week of the 11th. All right. If you have questions for next time, for next Tuesday, feel free to email me or text me. And have a good week.
Thank you, Rabbi Shasta.
Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robin.